Chaos. Absolute chaos. The judge walks back into the courtroom, face stone cold, and says 6 words that detonate the entire room. The sealed verdict is now public. And in seconds, gasps, shouts, total meltdown, Trump's lawyers freeze, reporters jump up. Not one juror even glances at Trump as they walk past him. And when that verdict is read aloud, the truth hits like a hammer. Crimes exposed, intent exposed, a cover-up exposed. Members of Congress are already calling for immediate arrest. The courtroom is collapsing into disbelief, power shifting in real time. And what the judge revealed next, nobody was ready for.
The judge came into the courthouse and said, into the courtroom and said that he was getting ready to excuse the jury and left the courtroom, came back a little later than expected, and said he just received news that there was a verdict. There was a gasp, an audible gasp, several people just stunned that this verdict was happening today. A few minutes later, around 5 o'clock, the jury walked back into that courtroom, walking right past Donald Trump, not even looking at him. Not a single one of them cast any eye contact upon him. Walked into that box. At 5:03, they started reading the verdict. Within 3 minutes or 4 minutes, Donald Trump had been a convicted felon. Trump himself was quiet, impassive throughout the verdict, as he had been warned to be by the judge. The judge had told everyone to sort of maintain their decorum.
You know, every once in a while, our system gets tested in a way that forces everyone to pick a side. Not red or blue, not left or right, but something much simpler. Do we still believe in the rule of law, or do we let one man float above it because he's loud enough and powerful enough? What happened in that federal courtroom when a judge unsealed Donald Trump's sealed verdict and the room literally gasped is one of those moments. So let's start right there in that room. You've got a jury that already did its job. They heard the evidence. They went through the documents. They listened to witnesses. They came back with a verdict. Guilty. Trump becomes a convicted felon in a matter of minutes. That alone is historic. But for weeks, maybe months, the detailed findings behind that verdict were locked away, sealed, hidden from the public, while Trump's legal team fought like hell to keep them buried. And then the judge walks in and basically says, no, we're not doing this in the dark anymore. People in that courtroom described an audible gasp when the judge announced the verdict would be unsealed. That's not normal. Lawyers, reporters, court staff, these are people who see dramatic moments all the time. They don't gasp easily, but they did here because they understood exactly what that meant. Once those findings were read out loud, the lies, the spin, the talking points outside that building were about to collide with something Trump can't control, the official record. The key thing to understand is this. A sealed verdict gave Trump room to bluff. He could stand in front of cameras, post online, rant at rallies and say, they have nothing. It's all fake. It's political. And because the details were sealed, his supporters could cling to that story. They could tell themselves, well, we don't really know what's in there. Maybe the jury overreacted. Maybe it's technical. The fog helped him. Unsealing blows that fog away. What's reportedly in this verdict isn't vague. It's not, we kind of think he did something wrong. It's specific. It's detailed. It lays out what Trump knew, when he knew it, what he did about it, and how he tried to hide it. That's the part that really changes the game. Because Trump's main defense, in court and in public, has always been some version of, I didn't intend to break the law. I thought this was fine. I just followed advice. I'm innocent. They're out to get me. A verdict shreds that. It describes admissions that cut directly across his public statements. Private words that don't match the public performance. Evidence that he knew certain actions were illegal, that he moved forward anyway, and then took steps to cover his tracks. That's not the story of a guy caught up in confusion. That's the pattern of someone who thinks rules are for other people. And that's the bigger story here. This is about impunity versus accountability. For years, Donald Trump has treated the law as something to be bent, delayed, gamed, and, if necessary, bulldozed. Delay the trials, attack the prosecutors, smear the judge, call the jury rigged, turn every indictment into a loyalty test and a fundraising email. And honestly, it's worked for him politically. He's turned legal jeopardy into a tribal badge. If you're with me, you must say this is all corrupt. But courts don't run on vibes. They run on evidence. Juries aren't Twitter followers. They're people sworn under oath to decide based on what's in front of them, not what's trending. And when that jury convicted him, and the judge then unsealed the verdict, it was the justice system saying, "We heard your story, Mr. Trump. We just don't believe it." Trump's lawyers know how damaging that is, and that's why they fought so hard to keep the verdict sealed. They argued that making it public would prejudice other cases, that it would taint potential jurors, that it would be unfair to Trump. Think about that. Their position essentially was that the American people shouldn't know the specific reasons a former president was convicted of crimes because it might make him look bad in other courtrooms. And the judge said, "Tough, the public has a right to know." That matters. That's a judge choosing transparency over deference to power. And it sets a tone for everything that comes next. Because from this point on, anytime Trump or his allies step up to a microphone and say, "There was no intent, there was no crime, it was all politics," there's a document sitting there saying, actually, a jury disagreed, and here's why. You can already see the ripple effects. Members of Congress, after seeing what's in this verdict, are calling for Trump's detention. That's not normal political theater. You don't casually say a former president should be taken into custody immediately. You say that when the evidence laid out is so serious, so clear, that continuing to treat him like any other white-collar defendant out on bond feels like a betrayal of the system itself. Now, will the judge actually order Trump jailed while his appeals go forward? We don't know. That's a separate legal question. But the fact that the idea is even on the table, publicly, aggressively, tells you how damning these findings are. This isn't about bad press. It's about whether someone with this record can be trusted not to obstruct justice again. And that brings us to the next point: obstruction and cover-up. One of the most important parts of this unsealed verdict is the pattern it describes: hiding documents, instructing others to mislead, creating false records. That's what lawyers call consciousness of guilt. When you know you did something wrong, you don't just sit back and hope for the best. You start trying to erase fingerprints. You change stories. You pressure people. You move files. You twist the truth because you're afraid of what happens if the truth stands on its own. If this verdict lays out that kind of behavior in detail, and from the reporting that's exactly what it does, then Trump isn't just some guy who accidentally tripped over a line buried in statute. He's someone who saw the line, stepped over it, and then tried to bury it. And once that's in writing, signed off by a jury, it stops being one case. It becomes context for every other case. Think about the prosecutors in Georgia in the federal January 6th case, in the classified documents case, in the civil fraud cases. They're all reading this verdict now. They're seeing what arguments worked. They're seeing how a jury reacted to Trump's claims of confusion and innocence. They're seeing how a judge responded to his team's attempts to mislead and delay, and you can bet they're adjusting accordingly. Legally, that's devastating. Every time Trump's lawyers stand up in some new courtroom and say, "He didn't know, he was misled, this is all politics," a prosecutor can point to this unsealed verdict and say, "We've heard this song before. A jury already rejected it. Here's the document. Read it." Judges look at that too. They're careful, they're independent, but they're not blind. When another federal judge has already written, in effect, this defendant is not above the law. His team has tried to deceive the court, and here is clear evidence of knowing criminal conduct. That shapes how future judges see Trump's credibility. And credibility is everything in a courtroom. Now, zoom out for a second. What does this mean outside the legal world, out in the country, where people are just trying to pay bills and live their lives? For one thing, it makes it a lot harder to pretend this is all partisan. The word felon isn't coming from a campaign ad. It's coming from a verdict. The detailed story about intent and cover-up isn't a blogger's hot take. It's the product of sworn testimony, cross-examination, rules of evidence, and instructions given by a judge. You don't have to like the outcome. You don't even have to like the system. But you can't honestly say this is just vibes. The unsealing of the verdict gives ordinary people something solid to point to when they talk to that uncle, that coworker, that friend who insists Trump is the real victim here. Instead of getting lost in slogans, you can say, read what the jury actually found. Look at what's on the record. This isn't about tweets. This is about evidence. Politically, this is going to hang over everything. Trump has built his brand on being a winner, the guy who never faces consequences, the guy who always finds a way out. But a public, detailed verdict describing him as a man who knowingly committed crimes and then tried to hide them cuts right into that image. It doesn't matter how many rallies he holds or how many times he calls himself a martyr. The word felon doesn't go away. The admissions in that verdict don't go away. And as we get closer to the next election cycle, that matters. Voters are going to be asked, again, whether they want to hand power to someone whose own legal record reads like a case study in abusing that power. Some will say yes. Some will convince themselves that all of this is somehow justified. But a lot of people who are exhausted, who are tired of chaos, who just want a government that functions, and a president who isn't constantly in court, are going to look at that verdict and say, no, this is too much. That's the democratic stakes here. Not just what happens to Trump, but what we're willing to normalize. If we shrug at this, at a former president convicted, at a verdict describing intentional criminal conduct, at a judge saying he's not above the law, then we send a message that future presidents can push the line even further, that they can gamble on corruption, on obstruction, on disinformation campaigns, because at the end of the day, there will always be enough people willing to look away. If instead enough of us say, no, this is where the line is, then the unsealed verdict becomes more than a legal document. It becomes a warning label for future leaders. If you treat the law as a suggestion, you might eventually find yourself in the same position, listening to a judge read out findings you can't spin away. And there's one more piece that matters to me personally, what this says about the courts themselves. Trump has spent years trying to drag the judiciary into the mud with him. Every judge who rules against him is corrupt. Every prosecutor is radical. Every investigation is rigged. The goal is simple: convince his followers that no independent referee exists anymore, that every institution is just another player on some partisan team. This judge, by unsealing the verdict and calling out Trump's legal team for deception, pushed back against that. Not with a speech, not with a press conference, with action, with a ruling that says, our job is not to protect your image, our job is to uphold the law and inform the public. That's not glamorous. It doesn't go viral, but it's exactly what a functioning democracy needs. So where does this leave us? Legally, Trump is more boxed in than ever. Every new case he walks into, he carries this verdict on his back. Politically, the gap between the hero image he sells at rallies and the criminal record described in that document is wider than it's ever been. And morally, we're staring at a very simple test. Do we mean it when we say nobody is above the law? Because this is what that principle looks like in real life. It's messy, it's loud, it's uncomfortable. It involves judges making hard calls, juries doing tedious work, and the public being willing to confront ugly facts about someone who once held the highest office in the land. Donald Trump will keep yelling that he's the victim. He'll keep saying the system is out to get him. But now, thanks to this unsealed verdict, the system has something to say back. Here are the facts. Here's what you did. And here's what a jury of your peers concluded. Everything from this point forward, every appeal, every campaign rally, every political argument in a diner or a group chat is going to happen in the shadow of that record. And if you're wondering what you're supposed to do with all of this as just one person watching from home, here's my honest answer. You don't have to become a legal expert. You don't have to read every filing. But you do have a responsibility to care about the difference between evidence and slogans. That's it. When you talk politics with friends, when you scroll past headlines, when you walk into a voting booth, you carry that difference with you. Because authoritarian movements feed on confusion, they want you so overwhelmed, so cynical, that you throw up your hands and say, they're all the same. They're not all the same. There's a difference between a politician you disagree with and a politician whose own verdict describes deliberate criminal conduct and a cover-up. There's a difference between normal political spin and a years-long war on the basic idea of truth. For Trump's hardcore base, I know this verdict won't change much. Some people are fully invested. They've tied their identity to him so tightly that admitting he did anything wrong feels like admitting they were wrong. But the future of this country isn't decided by the people who will never change their minds. It's decided by everyone else, by the people who still listen, still think, still believe that facts matter. So if you take one thing from this unsealed verdict, let it be this: our system, flawed as it is, just produced a rare moment of clarity. A jury weighed the evidence. A judge refused to hide it. The truth, at least in this case, didn't stay buried. What we do with that truth, whether we demand accountability or let power skate by once again, will say as much about us as it does about Donald Trump. And that's the heart of this story. A man who spent his life acting like the rules never applied to him is finally facing a set of facts he can't shout down. The path he's on doesn't lead back to glory. It leads, step by documented step, toward real accountability, and very possibly toward prison. Whether we're the kind of country that sees that path through is now up to us.